New MCA trade agreement good for Minnesota. Commentary: Minnesota Farm Bureau president says the trade agreement will provide new market access for Minnesota dairy, poultry, and wheat farmers. Written on October 18. Observing trade negotiations is many times not easy. For months, we have waited patiently for progress from the Trump administration on a new deal with Canada and Mexico. Admittedly, the talks to update the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, in the shadow of a dismal farm economy tested our wills. Farm Bureau's consistent message to the administration was to do no harm to this trade relationship. Our ask was for the administration to work to lock in the progress that NAFTA created. After it was implemented in 1994, agricultural exports from the U.S. to Canada and Mexico increased from $8.9 billion in 1993 to $38 billion in 2016. The path taken by these negotiations was rocky. There were good signs and bad, including tough talk from the administration about scrapping the agreement altogether. In late September, our patience paid off when the U.S. trade negotiators announced that they had reached an agreement with Canada to join the United States and Mexico for a rebranded United States-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, USMCA. This new agreement preserves the trading relationship we have enjoyed with our North American neighbors, and other important provisions will help provide a measure of hope against the economic storm we are facing. We do not yet know the full benefit of this agreement, but we plan to have an economic analysis in the coming weeks. More market access. There is no doubt that this agreement will provide new market access for Minnesota dairy, poultry, and wheat farmers, and it maintains a zero-tariff platform on all other agricultural products sold among the three nations. This measure eliminates aspects of Canada's dairy program, classes 6 and 7, that have been used to undercut U.S. sales of dried milk products. We must remain vigilant to ensure this pledge holds up in the spirit of reform. Under the agreement, U.S. dairy products also gain access to an additional 3.6% of Canada's dairy market. Canada also agreed to grade wheat imports from the U.S. in a manner no less favorable than their own. This is a big change, as Canada has been using its grading system to discount the value of U.S. wheat crossings across the border. U.S. wheat crossing the border. On a related provision, the U.S. and Mexico agreed that all grading standards for agricultural products will be non-discriminatory. Provisions related to Mexico also include important marketing reforms to remove restrictions related to some geographic indicators. Food products such as cheese, including Gouda, Emmental, and Pecorino, that carry now common names indicative of a style of processing. This will help ensure that U.S. products do not face restrictions due to the mere use of common names. USMCA also includes, for the first time, measures that address cooperation, transparency, information sharing, agricultural biotechnology, and gene editing, the science-based trading standards to prevent trade barriers. Overall, this was a hard-fought win, and we commend the administration for all the efforts to solidify the trading relationships we have with our North American neighbors. We applaud the administration for a job well done. USMCA is a failure, and the Democrats know it. We might be better off with no deal at all than with this corporate giveaway that's little more than a basket of lies. The 1994 version of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was impressively terrible. President Donald Trump said it was the worst trade deal ever. Of course, that was because NAFTA was not negotiated by his administration. His 2018 version, the USMCA, was even worse. The original NAFTA did nothing to benefit workers or farmers in any countries involved. It did nothing to improve environmental standards. It made no effort to stop job outsourcing, raise wages, or protect worker rights. Pharmaceutical companies were granted extended patent protection, thereby locking in higher prescription drug prices, not just in the US, but in Canada and Mexico as well. Corporations were, in effect, incentivized to carry on business as usual and move jobs wherever the wages were the lowest and the labor standards were the weakest. The Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, ISDS, allowed businesses to take states to court over what they deemed unfair trade practices. Under NAFTA rules, at least Canadian farmers were protected by their farmer-run supply management policies, which ensured them a fair price and allowed Canadians to feed Canadians. Mexican farmers, however, were smothered under the flood of cheap U.S. taxpayer-subsidized grain exports that put many small farmers out of business. Many of those farmers in Mexico were forced off their land, took jobs at the maquiladoras of northern Mexico, which became the new home to the NAFTA outsourced jobs of the United States, or they crossed the Rio Grande and left their country altogether. After a year of revisions to the Trump administration's version of the USMCA, an agreement had passed the House. Democrats assert that their negotiations have produced a deal that is significantly better than NAFTA. Both parties are taking credit for what the White House calls a huge win for American workers, farmers, and businesses. It's hard to know what's worse, the deal itself, or that Democrats buckled under Trump's pressure to support it. Removing the investor-state dispute settlement provision and the pharmaceutical patent extensions were clearly wins, but they hardly make the USMCA a huge win. It is clearly still a huge loss for everyone except the corporations who have always won. Consider how low the bar is for worker justice, farm justice, the environmental protection, and free trade bills. Saying that there are improvements to the USMCA doesn't mean much. Giving Mexican workers the right to form independent unions and establishing inspection standards for Mexican factories won the support of many U.S. labor unions, but not the Mexican government, which insisted that inspections and independent panelists who would work toward Mexican labor reform, thus the low bar was hardly raised. The administration's claim that thousands of manufacturing jobs will be moved back to the U.S. is ridiculous at best, and its tax policies continue to incentivize job outsourcing, greenlighting U.S. auto manufacturers to expand production in Mexico. Assurances that Mexican workers would eventually earn a $16 an hour wage lets the government set wages, not the collective bargaining of unions. It also does nothing for U.S. workers, who in many industries were, at one time, paid close to double that figure, plus good benefits and healthcare coverage. In almost every way, the revised USMCA falls far short of the protections needed for workers and the environment. There's more language in the agreement on how the Canadian dairy industry would be dismantled than on how pollution would be measured. Environmental groups saw nothing in the final agreement that could win their support, noting that the agreement does not even mention climate change, let alone take measures to address it. While some farm groups and corporate agribusiness wholeheartedly support USMCA as a big win for all of agriculture, their definition of winning is expecting Canada and Mexico to, at the expense of their farmers, absorb the chronic overproduction of U.S. agriculture. USMCA will not, as the Farm Bureau Federation seems to think, make major improvements for U.S. farmers and ranchers. As Farm Journal Washington correspondent James Wiesmeyer notes, overall, there's not much major news out of this for agriculture, except this solidifies the North American market that we have, a market that doesn't even pay farmers their cost of production. Democrats know that they have lost the vote of rural Americans, and their support for the MCA, rather than fair farm prices, will not help win these votes back. Cosmetic changes to NAFTA will not save the farm. Expecting our trading partners to absorb our excess agriculture production will not save the farm. Saving the farm will only happen when Congress passes sensible legislation that prioritizes the interests of farmers over those of corporate agribusiness. Promoting fair farm prices by strengthening and enforcing antitrust laws, reinstituting country of origin labeling, implementing sensible rules on agricultural biotechnology, and the implementation of farmer-controlled production management systems for agriculture commodities will save the farm, not more one-sided free trade deals. The administration will say, promises made, promises kept. The Democrats, although they will deny it, have helped Trump's re-election bid, while throwing a few more Americans under the bus. We might be better off with no deal at all than this corporate giveaway that's little more than a basket of lies. The governments of the USMCA's member states and multinational corporations have been using the long con, playing the desperation of farmers, farm workers, unions, and the general population in the process, destroying the environment and making us all marks for corporate greed.